The dogs were barking so loud, I couldn't hear my own kids screaming behind me. I remember the gravel driveway cutting into my knees when I fell. I remember looking up and seeing the man I married, the man I raised 2 children with, standing on his new porch, arms folded, watching. Not moving, just watching. 3 days later, a judge signed a piece of paper that took every cent of his $450 million out of his hands and put it into mine. This is not a fantasy. This is what happens when a man forgets that the woman he humiliated still knows how to fight. Before I tell you how those dogs ended up in that driveway, you need to understand who I was before the money. Because the money didn't create a monster. It just took the mask off one that was already there. If this story grabs you in the first minute, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens in the next 20 minutes is going to make you furious, and then it's going to make you stand up and cheer. Let's go back to the beginning. 9 years earlier, Thea Calloway was folding laundry on a Tuesday night in a rented duplex in Arlington, Texas, when Holt walked in smelling like motor oil and fast food, dropped his tool bag by the door, and kissed the top of her head like it was the only good part of his day. "Rough one?" she asked. "They always are," he said, "but it pays the light bill." That was Holt back then, a transmission mechanic with grease under his nails and a laugh that filled up a room. He wasn't rich. He wasn't even close. But he showed up every single day. He showed up. Ask yourself something. How many people in your life have you loved simply because they never gave you a reason not to? That was Holt for a long time. They had 2 kids. Ren came first, a girl with her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's soft eyes. Then Asa, 3 years later, a boy who never stopped asking questions. The kind of kid who wanted to know why the sky was blue, and then wanted to know why you believed the answer. Money was tight. It was always tight. There were months they split a single box of cereal between 4 bowls and called it a family tradition instead of what it really was. There was the winter, the heater broke, and Holt slept on the living room floor next to the space heater, so the kids could stay warm in their room. There was a summer Thea took a second job doing books for a landscaping company just so Ren could keep taking dance class, because Ren lit up like a lantern every time she was on that floor, and Thea couldn't stand the thought of taking that light away from her. Holt used to sit on the porch steps some nights, a beer sweating in his hand, and say the same thing, almost like a prayer. "One day, baby. One day we're going to make it. I don't know how yet, but we are." She believed him, not because he had a plan, because he never once, in 9 years, gave her a reason to think he was lying. There were birthday parties in the backyard with a $2 piñata and a $100 smile on every kid's face. There was the anniversary they couldn't afford a restaurant, so Holt cooked spaghetti with jar sauce and lit a single candle and told her it was the finest restaurant in Texas. Table for 2, no reservations required. There was Copper, the golden retriever they adopted from a shelter the year Ren was born, who slept at the foot of the kids' beds every single night like an unpaid, extremely furry security guard. It wasn't a perfect life. It was a real one. And for 9 years, Thea Calloway would have told you, without a single second of hesitation, that Holt Calloway was the best decision she ever made. The ticket cost $2. Thea remembered that detail more than almost anything else. 2 crumpled dollars from the console of their 13-year-old truck, spent on a whim at a gas station off Interstate 20, because Ace had begged for a slushie, and Holt figured, why not? Let's try our luck too. $450 million. The lump sum, after taxes, still left them with more money than either of them could picture in their heads without their stomachs dropping. The night they found out, Holt sat on the kitchen floor of the duplex, his back against the cabinets, and sobbed. Not tears of a man trying to look emotional for a camera. Real, ugly, gasping sobs, the kind that come from somewhere old and tired. Thea sat down next to him and held his shaking hands, and Ren and Asa piled on top of both of them, laughing. Not understanding the number, only understanding that their parents were crying happy tears for the first time either of them could remember. "We made it," Holt kept whispering. "We actually made it." For about 6 weeks, it was everything Thea had ever imagined. A financial advisor, a trust structure, talk of a new house, college funds set up before Ren and Asa even understood what college was. Holt bought Thea a ring, a real one, finally, and slid it on her finger in the parking lot of the same gas station where they bought the ticket, laughing so hard both of them nearly missed the moment entirely. Then, slowly the crack started. It began small enough that Thea almost missed it. Holt started taking calls outside, on the porch. Phone pressed tight to his ear, voice dropping the second the screen door creaked. When she asked who it was, he said just a lawyer, or just business stuff, boring, you don't want to know. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? 9 years of a man who never lied to her had trained her not to look for lies. New clothes appeared in the closet. Not the durable, practical clothes Holt used to buy, but soft leather jackets, watches that cost more than their old truck, shoes with red bottoms that Thea had only ever seen on television. He started disappearing from meetings that ran late into the evening. He missed Ace's school science fair, something he had never once done in 10 years of school science fairs. He missed Wren's dance recital, and when she asked him afterward if he'd seen her solo, he said, "Of course, baby, you were incredible." But Wren had changed the routine last minute, and he described the old one. Small eyes, the kind that don't scream danger, the kind that whispered instead. Then came the morning Holt sat both her and the kids down at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to help Asa with third-grade math homework, and told him he needed space. Space for what? Thea asked, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. To think, Holt said, not quite meeting her eyes. About our future. About who I am now. This is a lot, Thea. The money changes things. I need to figure some stuff out on my own. He moved out 3 days later. He left the duplex, left the kids' school pickup schedule, left a modest joint account with barely enough for groceries and rent, while he took an undisclosed sum and disappeared into an address he refused to give her. Wren cried herself to sleep for a week. Asa stopped asking questions altogether, which was somehow worse. Thea told herself it was temporary, a phase, grief and shock wearing a strange, expensive-looking mask. She had no idea, not yet, just how wrong she was, or how far Holt had already gone before he ever sat down at that table. It was Odette Marsh, a neighbor 2 doors down who'd watched the kids more times than Thea could count, who finally told her the truth over a cup of coffee gone cold between them. Thea, honey, I wasn't going to say anything, but you deserve to know. My cousin does landscaping out in Highland Park. She said there's a house, a big one, brand new gate installed last month, and she swears she saw Holt's truck in the driveway. Said there's a woman living there too. The name that eventually surfaced was Briar Langston. 26 years old, a woman Holt had met at the financial advisor's office of all places, who had spent the better part of 2 months. Thea would later learn, whispering to Holt about how he deserved a fresh start, how a man with his money shouldn't feel guilty for wanting more, how the family holding him back was really just a family holding him down. Thea didn't tell the kids where she was going that Thursday afternoon. She told them she had errands. She drove 40 minutes to Highland Park, past estates with hedges trimmed into perfect rectangles, past gates with cameras mounted like sentries, until she found the address Odette's cousin had given her. The house was enormous. Stone and glass, a fountain out front that probably cost more than every home Thea had ever lived in combined. She sat in her car for 10 minutes just staring at it, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to convince herself there was still an innocent explanation. There wasn't. She got out. She walked up the long driveway, gravel crunching under sneakers that suddenly felt very out of place, and she rang the doorbell. Holt opened the door in a robe that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent used to. Behind him, she could see marble floors and a chandelier the size of a kiddie pool. He didn't look happy to see her. He didn't look ashamed either. He looked annoyed, the way you'd look at a solicitor who wouldn't stop knocking. Thea, you can't just show up here. I can't just show up here. Her voice cracked on the words. Holt, your children haven't seen you in 3 weeks. Asa thinks you left because of something he did. Do you understand that? Your son thinks this is his fault. I told you I needed space. You needed space from what? From us? From the people who were with you when you had nothing. That was when Briar appeared in the doorway behind him, arms crossed, wearing an expression that made Thea's blood run cold. Not guilt, not even discomfort. Boredom. Like Thea was an inconvenience standing between her and the rest of her evening. Holt, Briar said flatly, Handle this." And something in Holt's face changed. Thea watched 9 years of a man she thought she knew get replaced, right in front of her, by someone she had never met. "You need to leave," Holt said, low and cold. "Now." "Not until we talk about the kids. Not until you tell me what's actually going on." I said leave. She didn't leave. She stood her ground. Because somewhere underneath the fear, there was a mother who wasn't about to be dismissed from her own children's future by a man in a bathrobe. She raised her voice. She said things about responsibility, about the 2 babies crying themselves to sleep, about the years he swore would never mean nothing. And Holt Calloway, the man who once slept on a cold floor so his children could stay warm, turned toward the side gate and unlatched the run where 2 enormous dogs had been pacing since she arrived. "Get off my property," he said, "since you won't do it on your own." The gate swung open. Thea barely had time to turn before she heard the growl, low and rising, and then the sound of paws hitting gravel at a dead sprint. She ran. Her lungs burned. Her knees buckled once on the loose stone, and she went down hard, pain exploding up through her palms and shins. She scrambled backward, screaming, certain in a half-second that this was how it ended, in some stranger's driveway 40 minutes from home. And then she saw it, the second dog, slower than the first, hesitating at the sound of her voice, because underneath the unfamiliar collar and the sheen of an expensive new coat, it was Copper, their Copper, the dog who used to sleep at the foot of Wren's bed, the dog Holt had taken from his own children's home and repurposed into a guard animal for his new life. Copper stopped 3 feet from her, whimpering, confused, caught between 2 versions of a life he didn't understand either. It was enough of a delay. A groundskeeper came sprinting from the side yard, shouting, hauling the first dog back by its collar before it reached her. Thea didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran for a car, blood running from both knees, hands shredded from the gravel, sobbing so hard she could barely see the road in front of her. She drove home in a daze, replaying it over and over. The bathrobe, the boredom on Briar's face, the cold and unfamiliar voice that come out of a man who used to whisper, "One day, baby," like it was a promise sealed in blood. She got home, cleaned the blood off her hands in the bathroom sink with trembling fingers, and sat on the edge of the tub for a long time before she found the strength to walk into the living room, where Wren and Asa were waiting for her, asking why she was limping, why there was gravel still stuck to her jeans, why her eyes were red. She didn't tell them everything that night, but she told them enough. And when Asa asked, in a voice far too steady for an 11-year-old, "Is Dad going to hurt us too?" Something in Thea went from broken to focused in the space of a single breath. She picked up the phone that night, hands still shaking, and called the only lawyer's number she had ever bothered to save, Graham Pruitt, an old family friend who'd once handled her grandmother's estate. It was almost midnight. "Graham," she said, "I need you to tell me everything you know about emergency protective orders. Because I think my husband just tried to have me mauled on his front lawn, and by morning, I want a judge to know exactly what kind of man he's become." Graham Pruitt's office smelled like old coffee and older law books. Thea sat across from him with an ice pack pressed to one knee. Wren and Asa dropped at Odette's house in the morning and told him everything. The mansion, the robe, Briar's bored little smirk, the gate, the dogs, and Copper whimpering 3 feet from her face like he didn't know which family he belonged to anymore. Graham listened without interrupting once. When she finished, he set down his pen very slowly, the way a man does when he's trying not to let his own anger show in front of a client who's had enough fear for 1 week. "Thea," he said, "I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it clearly. That ticket was purchased with $2 from a joint account the 2 of you had held for 9 years. Under Texas community property law, that makes the winnings marital property, regardless of whose hand physically bought it, regardless of what his new lawyers want to tell him. He does not get to walk away with all of it. He never did." Thea felt something crack open in her chest. Not relief exactly. Not yet. Something closer to the first breath after being underwater too long. "There's more," Graham continued. "What happened yesterday at that house? That's not just a bad breakup, Thea. That's an attack. Releasing an animal on someone, on marital property no less, with your knowledge that it could cause serious injury. That's the kind of thing that gets an emergency protective order signed same day. Combined with him abandoning 2 minor children with no support arrangement, no notice, no plan, we filed this morning. Today, I want a judge looking at this before the sun goes down. But the morning wasn't done delivering blows. It was Graham's paralegal, a sharp-eyed young woman named Lacey, who found it first while pulling financial records for the emergency filing. A string of texts on a shared family cloud account Holt had apparently forgotten still synced to an old tablet in the duplex. Texts between Holt and Breyer, dating back nearly 4 months. For months, long before the lottery ticket, long before space to think. You don't owe them your whole life. Holt, you're allowed to want more. Once the numbers come in, we don't have to hide anymore. She's never going to understand who you're becoming. I do. Thea sat very still, reading message after message, watching a woman she'd never met slowly, patiently, methodically talk her husband out of 9 years of marriage, long before he ever held a winning ticket in his hand. How long has this been going on? Thea whispered, more to herself than to Graham. Long enough, Graham said quietly, that I don't think the money is what changed him, Thea. I think the money is just what he'd been waiting for. That single realization hurt worse than the dog attack had, because a man losing his mind over sudden, overwhelming wealth was almost forgivable, a temporary madness, a fever that might break. But a man who had been planning his exit for months, quietly, while still eating dinner at that kitchen table, still tucking Renan at night, still whispering, "One day, baby," that wasn't a fever. That was a performance. And Thea had been the only one in the house who didn't know she was watching a show. The emergency filing went in at 2:47 that afternoon. Protective order. Emergency custody request. Asset freeze motion. Citing both the domestic violence incident and the flight risk posed by $450 million sitting in accounts controlled by a man who had, according to DeLacy's records, already opened 2 new offshore-adjacent trust structures in the past 3 weeks. But what Thea learned about Breyer Langston that night, the full picture, the part Graham had been softening for her, was about to hurt worse than anything that had come before it. Breyer Langston, it turned out, wasn't simply a younger woman who'd caught Holt's eye at a financial advisor's office by accident. She worked there, a junior associate at the very firm Holt's new money manager had recommended. And she had, according to internal firm emails DeLacy uncovered through subpoena 2 days later, flagged Holt's account personally, requesting to be assigned as a client relations liaison the same week as Wynn was publicly announced. She had built a relationship with a married father of 2, systematically, over months, with the practiced patience of someone who had done this before. Thea would later learn, from a tearful phone call with a woman named Priya, another ex-partner of Holt's advisor firm, who'd seen this pattern once already with a different lottery client 2 states over, that Breyer had a habit. Find the newly wealthy. Find the ones who felt guilty about it. Convince them the guilt was a problem, not the betrayal. It should have made Thea feel less alone. Instead, it made her feel like a statistic. But it was betrayal number 3 that turned Thea's grief into something colder and far more useful. 2 weeks before he ever sat the family down at that kitchen table, Holt had visited an estate attorney. Not Graham, a different one. In Dallas, a man whose entire practice specialized in shielding sudden wealth from spouses. He'd asked, according to records Graham's team obtained through discovery, how quickly can assets be moved into a trust that's difficult to reach in a divorce? He had also secured, 3 days after the winning numbers were announced, but 2 full weeks before he ever mentioned space to Thea, a lease on the Highland Park mansion under his shell LLC, the very house the dogs were kept in. He had been planning his exit before the confetti from the celebration in their kitchen had even been swept up. The emergency hearing was set for the following Tuesday, in front of Judge Cohenhale, a woman known around the Dallas family courts for having exactly 0 patience for men who thought money bought them the benefit of the doubt. Graham warned Thea it might not be a full hearing, given the severity of the dog attack and the documented flight risk behavior around the assets. There was a real chance the judge would issue emergency relief on the bench, pending a fuller hearing later. He was right. Judge Hale reviewed the incident report, the photographs of Thea's shredded palms and bruised knees, the financial records showing the Shell LLC and the offshore adjacent trust filings, and the 4 months of messages between Holt and Breyer. and she did not take long. This court finds sufficient evidence of both an immediate physical threat to the petitioner and a documented pattern of financial concealment. Judge Hale said, her voice even and unhurried in a way that only makes a room feel more dangerous. Effective immediately, a protective order is granted barring Holt Calloway from any direct contact with Thea Calloway. Temporary primary custody of the minor children is granted to petitioner, with supervised visitation only, pending a full custody evaluation, and all marital assets, including but not limited to the lottery proceeds, Associated Trust, and Highland Park property, are frozen pending the outcome of these divorce proceedings. $450 million. Frozen. In the space of one afternoon, on the strength of gravel-torn knees and a paper trail Holt had been too arrogant to hide well enough. It felt, Thea would say later, like watching someone hand you back your entire life in a single sentence. The order was signed Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, a process server named Roscoe Fenwick, a soft-spoken man who did this for a living and had genuinely seen it all, was standing at the gates of the Highland Park mansion with the paperwork in hand. Holt answered the door himself this time. No robe, a designer sweater instead, the kind that probably cost more than a month of Thea's old grocery budget. He read the first page, and his face went the color of the marble floors behind him. "This is a mistake," he said. "This has to be a mistake. Call my lawyer." "You're welcome to," Roscoe said mildly, "but I'd read all the pages first." By Wednesday evening, Holt's new financial advisor had tried, twice, to move funds out of the primary account and into one of the offshore adjacent trusts. The same trust he'd set up 2 weeks before the family even knew the money was in danger of being touched. Both attempts bounced back, flagged and blocked, the account frozen down to the last available dollar. His car was declined at a restaurant that night, in front of Briar, in front of the table of the new friends he'd been so eager to impress with a life built on money that, as of Tuesday afternoon, was no longer his to spend. By Thursday morning, 3 separate people close to the situation reported the same thing to Graham's office. Briar had started distancing herself. Fewer public appearances at Holt's side. A business trip that seemed materialized out of nowhere. The kind of woman who had built a career finding wealthy, guilty men discovered almost instantly that a wealthy man with frozen assets and an active police report attached to his name was significantly less interesting than the version of him she'd been chasing for 4 months. Holt, meanwhile, was drowning. His new estate attorney, the one who'd helped him hide assets in the first place, billed him at a rate that ate through what little liquid cash he had left outside the frozen accounts within days. The groundskeeper who pulled the first dog back before it reached Thea gave a statement to Roscoe's office, unprompted, describing exactly what he'd witnessed on the porch that afternoon. The gate, the command, the deliberate release. Security footage from the mansion's own front gate camera, installed by Holt himself only weeks earlier to keep out exactly the kind of unwanted visitor he never imagined would be his own wife, captured the entire thing in crisp, undeniable color. By Friday, day 3, Holt's attorney called Graham's office with an offer. Not a generous one. A desperate one. He wanted a protective order, softened in exchange for a faster asset release. Graham's answer took him 4 words. "Ask the judge yourself." He did. Judge Hale was not moved. By the end of that first week, Holt Calloway had gone from $450 million in a mansion with fountain to a man sitting in a rented hotel room, locked out his own accounts, represented by a lawyer he could no longer comfortably afford, publicly named in a police report, and abandoned by the very woman he'd released 2 dogs to protect. Thea, meanwhile, sat in the small duplex in Arlington with Wren curled against one side of her and Asa against the other, temporary custody paperwork on the coffee table. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she slept an entire night without waking up in a panic. The full truth came out slowly, the way it usually does. Not in one dramatic confession, but in pieces, stitched together across depositions and discovery documents over the following months. It turned out Holt had told Briar, in one of the very first messages between them, something Thea would read only once and never be able to forget. "If I ever win big, I'm not staying. Money like that is a way out. I just need the right push." He hadn't been swept away by sudden wealth. He'd been waiting for an excuse his entire adult life. and Briar had simply been the one patient enough to hand it to him. The dogs, the groundskeeper eventually admitted under oath, had been given a standing command weeks before the incident, a command meant specifically for Thea, in case she ever showed up uninvited. Holt hadn't lost control of the situation in a moment of panic. He had planned it. He had wanted her scared enough, humiliated enough, hurt enough, that she'd simply disappear from his new life without a fight. He had badly misjudged which mother he was dealing with. The security footage from his own front gate ended up, through no leak Thea ever authorized, circulating on a local news segment about wealthy men and domestic violence protections. Holt's face, unmistakable, releasing the gate latch, standing motionless as his wife scrambled across gravel on her hands and knees. Public opinion did what public opinion does. Business associates distanced themselves. The image he'd spent his new fortune trying to build collapsed under the weight of 11 seconds of security footage he never imagined the world would see. By the time the divorce was finalized 8 months later, Holt walked away with a fraction of what he once held. The rest divided according to Texas community property law, further reduced by legal fees that had ballooned into the millions defending indefensible behavior, and further reduced still by a settlement that accounted for both the assault and the deliberate concealment of assets. Full legal and primary physical custody of Ren, and Asa went to Thea, with visitation so restricted and so supervised that Holt saw his own children for hours a month, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed monitor. Briar Langston was long gone by the time the ink dried. Copper came home in the divorce settlement too, the only asset nobody bothered to contest, because nobody wanted a headline of fighting over custody of the family dog after everything else that had come out. Thea used part of her settlement to buy a modest home, not a mansion. She had enough of houses with fountains and gates and dogs trained to attack, in a quiet neighborhood close enough that Ren could keep dancing at the same studio, and Asa could keep asking his endless questions at the same school. She put the rest into a trust for the kids' education, untouched, undisturbed, exactly the way she and Holt had once dreamed about doing together, back when dreaming together still meant something. Ren still dances. Asa still asks why. Copper still sleeps at the foot of Child's bed every single night, an old dog who'd been dragged into someone else's mistake and finally made it back home. Here's what the story leaves behind, if you take nothing else from it. Sudden money doesn't build character, and it doesn't destroy it either. It just removes the excuse people have been using to hide who they really were. Pay close attention to how someone treats you the moment they believe they have nothing left to lose by showing you their true self, because that version of them was always in there, waiting. And if you're ever standing in a moment where you feel powerless, remember Thea's knees on that gravel driveway. Remember that the very same night, she picked up a phone instead of giving up. Never underestimate a mother fighting for her children. It is, without question, one of the most dangerous forces on this earth. Dangerous for exactly the right people. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you want to stand up and cheer by the end, let me know in the comments which betrayal hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear that walking away with nothing can still mean walking away with everything that matters. And subscribe, because there are more stories like Thea's coming, and you will not want to miss them.